Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. The other day I put a video out talking about some of my favorite early summer baits, and I had a comment from a viewer who specifically asked me to talk about some of my favorite baits for fishing outside weed lines, the outside grass lines. And I thought that was a really good topic to address because there is some good grass lines starting to form pretty much all over in the country. And within another couple of weeks, we will have really defined outside grass lines around the country. So from that standpoint, let's talk about some of my favorite baits to fish on these outside weed lines. And before I do get into those, I do want to remind you that I do have a members only channel as well. We do additional monthly videos, a members only live stream on a monthly basis, and you can have direct access to me. So if that interests you, please check out my members only information on my YouTube homepage. Also, if you want to support the channel and need to purchase some tackle, please use my Tackle Warehouse affiliate link. I'll put that in the video description for you as well. And you can bookmark it. So for future purchases, that will also help support the channel, and it's very, very much appreciated. Okay, so let's talk about some of my favorite grass lines. Before we get into the baits, I do just want to go over outside grass lines in general. So there's a bunch of different types of weed lines that we're talking about. In some instances, if you have a flat tapering bottom, generally speaking, you don't have a really defined grass line. You'll kind of have the grass just slowly disperse as you get deeper. Those generally, in my opinion, are not as good from a high percentage standpoint, meaning I can't break down those areas as fast as I can a much better defined grass line. Doesn't mean there aren't fish there. It just means sometimes you got to spend a lot more time fishing those areas to locate where the fish are at. And a lot of times I feel like the fish are more spread out. Ideally, what I'm going to be looking for are grass lines that are much more defined. And that could happen for a couple of reasons. They can happen because you have a quick, steep dropping contour line. So maybe, you have a drop off that goes from 10 feet to 20 feet and the grass stops at 14 feet and it's a really defined edge. Sometimes it happens just because grass generally tends to have a maximum growing depth. And from that standpoint, even if you have a relatively flat drop off, you may just go from 8 to 9 feet, but the grass stops at 8 feet. So from that standpoint, you don't necessarily have to have a steep drop off. You just need to know that there are certain depths that for whatever reason the grass doesn't grow at. The other thing to keep in mind is a lot of these more defined grass lines are generally better with taller growing grass, meaning milfoil, say, grows generally about 8 feet tall. It forms a wall, a really solid wall. A lot of times you get the same thing with hydrilla where you get these blooms of hydrilla, but it's a solid wall. And from that standpoint, I personally feel like those are generally better for a couple of reasons. One, they provide much better shade lines, and at the same time, that solid wall a lot of times allows the fish to push bait fish into those areas and utilize it almost as a like a seawall, an actual wall that they can corral bait into. So I think they prefer those. Now, having said that, if you have, say, a sandgrass edge that's out in 14 feet of water, they can be on that too. Just keep in mind the weed line itself, the grass may only grow a couple feet off the bottom. I just don't feel like that generally provides as good a weed lines to fish. The other thing is try to identify some of your irregularities within the weed line. It could be a little bit of a horseshoe or a bay in the grass, so you have a straight line and then a little dip in. It could be a point in the grass. It could be a point where you've got maybe a little rock cluster that meets the edge. It could be where you have the grass hits a drop off. You're trying to identify high percentage spots to look at. Once you identify those spots, a lot of times they're good for a long period of time, meaning you can continue to go back to them. And a lot of times you'll have schools of fish found. So if you can find a good spot, a lot of times you can go back multiple times and catch a couple fish each time you go to it. So it's really worth trying to identify these good weed line edges. And if it has something to do with a hard structure, so maybe it's a rock, maybe it's a sunken boat, maybe it's a defined point, a lot of times they're good year after year after year. So it's not necessarily like it's just a one-day deal. So it's worth putting the time in to try to find these. Now, when it comes to finding them, that's where your baits come into play. And that's what the question was that I want to address. I have lots of different ways to go about this, and I fish a lot of different styles of baits. Now, first and foremost, you got to recognize you're fishing around grass. So just because you're around grass doesn't mean you got to throw a weedless bait. It means you might have to be more patient with the fact that you're going to catch weeds on your hooks if they're exposed, but you don't have to throw a weedless bait. In fact, a lot of times I like to throw an exposed hook knowing that it'll grab some grass and I can rip that bait out of there, create an explosion that's going to generate an erratic strike or a reactionary strike. So don't necessarily think you have to throw something weedless. Now, obviously, from a efficiency standpoint, you're probably better throwing a weedless bait. So one of the first ones that I love to go with is a jig. Jigs are really good in grass, specifically one that's a little bit more streamlined. So in this case, this is the Picasso Hog Snatcher jig. I love it because you've got a little bit of a recessed hook eye into the lead head. It's got a little bit of a bullet style head on it. And from that standpoint, it kind of goes through the grass versus catching the grass. You know, if you throw a jig that's got a little bit wider front head on it or a more exposed hook eye, it tends to grab a little bit more grass. But the Hog Snatcher comes through grass great. And I'm going to be fishing this in a couple of manners. So I'm not fishing this where I'm going to be plunking it. We're not talking about like actually you know, putting it into matted grass. We're talking about fishing grass lines. So you might be able to see the grass, but it's not necessarily exposed. I'm fishing a casting jig in this manner, so I'm not really flipping it. You can flip it to the edges for sure, but I like to cast it and actually throw it up to where I think it's in the grass, and then I'm gonna stroke the jig out. So I'm actually getting it to go to the bottom, I'm ripping it, the bait's gonna fly up, fall back in, and as I'm working it back, it's eventually gonna hit the true weed line. That's gonna be where most of my bites come from, but I'm trying to throw into the edge of the grass. I'll rip it out within 2, 3, 4 strokes of that jig. It'll be out of the grass. Once it's out of the grass, I'll fish it, you know, a little bit longer, you know, maybe 1 or 2 more strokes, but then I'm reeling it in. So generally speaking, I'm going to fish the Hog Snatcher maybe a quarter of the cast. That's really what I'm looking for. And I like to put either something like this Berkley meaty chunk on the back or something that doesn't have big flapper craws necessarily to slow the fall down. I'm trying to get something more streamlined. The Berkley Pit Boss is good for this, where you get it to come up and it's coming down fast. I don't necessarily want it to helicopter. I'm really trying to get a reactionary strike out of the fish. But this is one of the best baits that I know to really cover water quick and help me identify where the fish are at. Once I've identified where the fish are at, that's when I can start to slow down with some other baits. Now, one that I've had a ton of success the last couple of years on, I've done videos on this on my channel, specifically fishing weed lines, is the Core Tackle Ozark rig with a long style worm. So this is a Berkley Magnum hit worm. It works great with your bigger cut tail worms. It works great, say, with the big 7.5 or 10 or 12 inch power worms. The key here is if you have a big worm, and when this bait falls, it falls with a really good wiggle. So I'll throw this up and fish it similar to the jig. I'll throw it up, let it wiggle to the bottom, I'll pull it up, it wiggles back down, and I'm really just swimming this through that grass line edge. A lot of times this is better more on a parallel presentation to the grass versus the jig, which I like to be a little bit more at a 45-degree angle. But a worm is one of the absolute best baits that you can have when fishing grass because it's just a streamlined bait, comes through the grass great. And I love this because not only do you get the movement of the worm itself, you get the movement of the Ozark rig. Specifically, I like to use it on the 5/0 3/8 ounce or the 5/0 quarter, but the 5/0 3/8 ounce is my favorite with your bigger worms. Now, additionally, if I'm looking to really slow down and pick apart an area that I feel very confident has fish, this one might surprise a lot of you, but I like to go with a wacky rig, just like this Berkley Maxcent the General. So your wacky rigs are going to be something that I have to have a ton of patience when I do, but I've won a lot of money doing it, where I'm actually throwing basically a weedless wacky or lightly weighted weedless wacky rig up to that grass line, letting it fall down and just fishing it, you know, again, that first portion of my cast, but it's really, really good at generating strikes from fish that just don't want a bigger, bulkier moving bait. They want something slow. This is it. But the thing is, super slow presentation, because sometimes you got to let that thing fall down into 14 feet of water. It just takes a long time to fish. So if you're looking for the fish, I'm not going to sit here and say that your wacky rig on like the core tackle wacky shot hook weedless wacky is your best bet. But if you know where the fish are at, that is a great, great presentation in my opinion. Okay, so we've kind of talked about the 3 baits that I like to use. 1 to locate the fish, 2 to, you know, kind of pick apart those areas. These are the next 2 are the ones that are probably going to surprise you a little bit more. I really like to throw crankbaits. Crankbaits are a great, great search bait. They're really good at getting down to the depth that I need, and they're really good to fish along a good solid line of grass. So don't think that you necessarily have to make a clean cast, because a lot of times you do want to get it caught in the grass and then you can rip it out. So you need a good clean grass to do it, a good crispy grass, but it's a great bait at generating strikes. And one thing a lot of people don't realize is a lot of times the fish aren't necessarily in the grass. They're using the grass line as like a highway. And depending on the conditions, a lot of times the fish are outside of the grass by a decent amount, 10, 15, 20 feet. So if you've got overcast conditions, if you've got low light conditions, or you got a really good shade line. This is one thing a lot of people don't recognize, but if you've got a shade line where that grass, which is coming up 10 feet off the bottom, is got the sun where it's casting a 45-degree shade line off of that grass, well, there's shade 10 feet off that grass line that the fish are going to be mulling around in as well. When that happens, that's when you can throw some of your moving baits like the crankbait. So I'll try to cast this more parallel again to the grass, working it as close to the grass as I can. If I catch the grass a little bit, snap it out, I'm good with that too. But a lot of times they're going to be, you know, 5-10 feet off that grass line, and a crankbait is one of those baits that is really, really good at getting those fish to bite. Now, along those same lines, another one I love to throw is a heavy vibrating jig. So this is 1.25 ounces. This is a Z-Man jackhammer. We've got the Berkeley Power Stinger on the back. And this combination will allow me to fish really deep grass, very fast and efficiently, be able to rip it out and just keep my bait down where the fish are at. That's one issue with throwing something like a spinnerbait. You can throw a big heavy 1-ounce spinnerbait, that works as well. I just feel like when I'm throwing a vibrating jig, I get better reaction strikes. I can let that bait get down into the grass and I can explode it out, rip it out, the same way you'd be fishing grass in 4 feet of water, say in the pre-spawn period. But a big, heavy vibrating jig will allow you to get down there. 3/4 ounce can work as well. It just kind of depends on what depth you're fishing. I can fish this effectively down to grass that grows 20 feet deep. It's just a really, really good presentation. And it's something you don't hear many people talking about. The same for ledge fishing. If you're a ledge fisherman, a big heavy chatterbait like that 1.25 ounces is a really good one to throw too. But those are kind of the baits that I really like to throw. There are other ones you can utilize too, but these kind of cover the gamut. It's not, you know, I think a crankbait, one other thing to mention with that, generally your tighter wobbling crankbaits are going to be better than your really wide wobbling crankbaits. And the reason for that is they'll cut through the grass better than the really wide wobbling ones, which will tend to catch a few extra strands of grass, which again, depending on how thick the grass is something that can just make you less efficient if you're catching too much grass. That's where the crankbait's important to get one that's a little bit thinner profile, runs really true. It's just a great presentation. A lot of people don't fish a crankbait or some of your faster moving baits on some of those deep outside weed lines, but they work really, really well. So hopefully this answers the viewer's question. As viewers out there, if you have other baits you like to throw on outside weed lines, put it up in the comment section if you want to share. It's great to have other anglers learning from all of you as well. Otherwise, thanks for watching. I appreciate all the support. Stay tuned. New video coming out tomorrow.